This is the Adopted Mom Podcast. Adoption may look different for each family, but we need solidarity from other crazy people who took this leap. And that is what we do here. We encourage, we build up, we share the wins and losses. We lean on each other, and we get through this together. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, everyone, to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. I am Alex Fitton, and I have the pleasure of hosting this show for all of my fellow parents who are weary and could use some encouragement in this ridiculous thing we have chosen to do for the least of these. I have a couple of announcements before we get started, the first of which is to tell you guys that planning is officially underway for Birth Mom Brunch on Saturday, May 12th. That is the day before Mother's Day, which is National Birth Moms Day. We are still in the early stages of planning, but we need a couple of things from you. If you are a birth mom, we would absolutely love to have you join us. We will be serving an amazing brunch, gifting you with some fun swag, and honoring the amazing choice that you've made for your child to have life. If you are not a birth mom but would like to be involved, please contact me on Facebook or at alexfitton@gmail.com. And that's not just for you locals. If you are not local and you want to help in a monetary way, or just if you have some resources that you could throw our way, please still reach out. Secondly, I want to remind you guys about the Empowered to Connect simulcast happening on April 13th and 14th. This is a widespread simulcast, so I would encourage everyone to find a location near you that is hosting. If you are local to Northwest Arkansas, though, you're going to want to come to the Grove Church to sit in on this. Please contact Rachel Kirksey at rachel.kirksey, that's Kirksey, at gmail.com with all of your questions. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Third, I'm starting a new show for the podcast on Facebook Live on Thursday evenings at 8:30. I did my first one this past week on grace, and I would love for you to check it out and join the discussion. God has been really laying it on my heart lately, yes, again, to dive into the meaning of grace and how I can give it more freely to myself. I talked about a couple of different ways that we deny ourselves grace, in our mental capacities and in our mistakes. I hope you gain much from Jesus' outpour in this. I definitely have. So be sure to join me on Thursday evenings for the live show, and I'll occasionally be doing giveaways to the commenters, so you don't want to miss that. This week, we're joined by Camille Pinkerton. Camille is another brave soul who flipped her birth order on its head and adopted before having her 2 biological daughters. That part was intentional. What was completely off of her radar was meeting her new adopted son and realizing that, surprise, he has extensive special needs. Motherhood took a rocky start and looks completely differently than Camille had envisioned. She and I talked about all of these surprises and so much more. So let's get to it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Adoptive Mom Podcast, Season 2. And I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest. So hi Camille, how's it going?
Hi, I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. Are all your kids in bed now, or are you?
They just got in bed, so I can't promise they're not going to pop up, but they're in bed for the moment.
I feel like all moms can only say that, just they're in bed for the moment. That's
right. I'm not counting
status.
on anything.
So, okay, speaking of kids, tell us about your family a little bit.
Okay, well, I am married to Brandon. We've been married for 18 years, and we have 3 kids. We have Zachary, who is our adopted child, and he is 12, and he has special needs. He's got CP, and he's autistic. And then we have 2 biological daughters. Rachel is 9, and Kate is 5.
Wow. Okay, so you messed up your birth order too. So you're another brave mama.
Yeah, well, we adopted before we had our biological kids. So Zachary was our first child.
Okay, gotcha. And I'm still reeling a little bit because you said you were married for 18 years, and I don't feel like that can be possible because you look like you're in your 30s-ish. So.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, but I am older than that. So we won't go there.
You got some good genes there.
Yes. Thank you, Mom.
That's awesome. Okay, so now you told us about Zachary, and that's part of why I was so excited to have you on the podcast, because we are going to jump in a little bit later and talk about kind of some unmet expectations in adoptions and how a lot of us mamas are thrown many, many curveballs. And in your case, it was like a giant curveball that hit you in the head. So,
yeah.
So on that note, why don't you just tell us a little bit, or not a little bit, why don't you tell us your whole entire adoption story?
Okay, absolutely. Well, it is interesting because everybody that I get questions from asks me, I don't get a lot of adoption questions, but when they do, they say, did you know? And they don't really finish the sentence, kind of like, did you know he had special needs when you went into this? And so when we were engaged, my husband had some 2 girls in his church who had been adopted from China. And it just, I think, really meant a lot to him. He just saw that family go through the process, and it really touched him and made a difference in his life. And so when we got engaged, he told me, I really have it in my heart to adopt from another country. And, he just kind of asked me, are you okay with that? And so I was like, absolutely, I'm totally on board. And of course, that, you're young, you're engaged, you don't really know the future or what that means. But I definitely, my heart was definitely open to that if that was what God called us to. So we had been kind of planning on it all along. And we had been married about 6 or 7 years, I think. And we both just wanted to go forward with it. So we started looking into different options, different countries. At that time, there were a lot of countries you could adopt from. I think it's kind of slowed down a little bit now, but we just looked at different agencies, and we decided to go with Dillon International, which is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we first started out thinking we would adopt from Korea because there was just a shorter wait time with them. And every country has a different set of qualifications that you have to meet. And so at that time, we were not 30 yet, and you had to be 30 to adopt from certain countries. And certain countries have a requirement of how long you've been married. And so we just kind of matched up with that country. And so we went forward with all the paperwork, and, it was a long process. There was lots of paperwork, lots of stuff you have to just send in, and that gets approved. And then you do another part. And then, of course, home studies and things like that. And so while we're going through this process, Korea started really slowing down. And so when we first started out, it was like a 4 to 6 month wait for referral. And then the next month, it was like 6 to 8 months. And then the next month, it was like an 8 to 10 month wait. And then It became 10 to 12, and then it became 12 to 18. So within the span of a few months, we went thinking, once we get our home study and everything in place, then we're going to have like a 4-month wait for referral. And then it became, it probably is going to be more like an 18-month wait. And, we were just kind of, we were ready to move forward. And that was we weren't really excited about waiting that long, So it was interesting because at the same time, Vietnam had been totally closed, and it opened back up for this short window of time. And so when it opened, they had lots of children available because it had been closed for like 5 years. And so they told us, if you switch countries, it's pretty much an immediate referral. So like as soon as we get all your paperwork switched over, we'll send you a referral like the next day.
Wow.
Yeah. So we were like, okay, let's do that. So we actually switched countries, but they somehow lost our paperwork. And so it had been a couple of weeks, and I'm thinking, where's my referral? But I didn't want to be impatient and be bugging them, But I eventually emailed the lady and just said, hey, I'm just kind of wondering what we should expect from y'all. And she's like, oh, we didn't even have all your paperwork switched over. It got lost in the shuffle somehow. I'm really sorry. And so then they, at that point, did finally get it all fixed and switched over. And the next day, or within the next few days, we got a referral. So when we got it, it was a couple of pictures of him, and he was 4 months old at the time. This was July of 2006. And so I took all the paperwork we had, and I took it to the doctor, took his picture. They looked through it. And there's really not a lot of information. Something that the counselor who had done our home study told us was that international adoption is a risk, and you never know what you're going to get, and you're not going to get a lot of health information. And at that point, my thought was, oh, that's not going to happen to us.
Yeah.
I was kind of naive, and I thought, well, that's not going to happen to us. Everything's going to be fine. And so the information that we got just said he had been born a couple of weeks early, nothing severe that we knew of, and he had gone to the orphanage the next day after he was born. So we decided to accept the referral, and we waited a few months till we could travel. I think it was like on Halloween of 2006, we traveled to Vietnam, and then it was on Halloween that we got on Halloween of 2006, we got the approval to travel. We actually traveled in November. So we were there over Thanksgiving.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think, I'm trying to remember, it's been a long time. I think it was like November 22nd was his adoption day. So I'm thinking that was like the day before Thanksgiving. And then we had him with us on Thanksgiving. We went, flew to Vietnam, just my husband and I, and, got out of the plane, and the people there in Vietnam that worked with our adoption agency met us there. They took us to a hotel, and we stayed the night, and then we drove out to his orphanage the next day, which was kind of in a smaller town. And it was really funny because we got there, and, you're like so ready to meet your child, and oh my gosh, you're nervous, you're about to become a parent. And we get there, and the lady's like, oh, come on in my house and have some lemonade. And so we had to sit there and drink lemonade with her while we're right next door to the orphanage. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, take me over there,
Yeah, seriously.
And so we went through that, and then we went to this other little place, and we had to go in and sit at this table and talk to these people. There were all these formalities we had to go through. But finally, we went over to the building he was in, and we went upstairs, and there's just this room full of babies, and just two caregivers, and they're just trying to take care of, basic needs. And so the lady says to me, which one do you think it is? And I was going, okay, I'm going to have to guess,
This is the same lady who made you drink lemonade instead of meeting your kid?
Right. It was a little overwhelming.
Maybe she was new.
I don't know what it was. I think she had been working there a while. I don't know if it's fun to see the look on the parents' faces when they're like, I don't know. But apparently I guessed correctly. So
wow.
I was like, I think that's him. And she was like, yes, that's him. And so, okay, good. So kind of okay, can I pick him up? and she's like, yeah, go ahead. And so I went over and, he's just been laying in a bed for months. He's 10 months old at this point. And so I picked him up, and when I picked him up, I just knew then, okay, something is not right here. He was just really floppy, and I couldn't hold his head up, couldn't hold his body up, and just, when a child just kind of sits on your hip when you pick him up,
right.
And he just couldn't do that. And so, that was just my first thought, oh my goodness, something is wrong. And so we sat down on the floor, and we were able to spend all of that day with him. And he would I think he had not been held for very long at all, for very long time periods, because he gave himself his own bottle. And when they would feed the kids, they would just put him on the floor and kind of hold them down and shovel food into their mouths. And so when we held him, he would just immediately fall asleep. And it was just kind of like this, finally somebody's holding me. And so as we held him and gave him his bottle and spent time with him, my husband noticed, he's not using his right arm. And of course he wasn't real active at that time, but you could still just kind of see, okay, that's different. That's what's going on here. So we went back to our hotel that night, and my husband and I just talked about it, and we decided that, okay, whatever it is, we just need to take him home, and we need to figure it out and get him whatever kind of help he needs. And so we spent another day. The next day we spent there with him all day, and then the next day we were able to go to the orphanage and pick him up and take him with us and go to the ceremony. When we first came to the orphanage, he was not smiling at all, and he was really not making any kind of noises and not a lot of eye contact. And by the third day, he was recognizing us, and he started smiling at us and getting excited. And my husband would lean down and talk to him, and he would kind of coo, and
Aww.
He would bounce. He would just kind of bounce in his crib when he would see us. And it was
That's
pretty
adorable.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, just to see the transformation in just a few days was really pretty amazing. So we took him with us. We went through the ceremony, and then we had to spend almost 3 weeks in Vietnam with a new baby. So that was interesting. It's like, okay, I've just become a mom for the first time. I'm in a foreign country. I have this new baby, and we're in a hotel. So we just kind of lived the Vietnamese lifestyle for a few weeks. And we just put him in a little pack on our chest and walked around the city, and everything is, there's just tons of traffic and tons of people. So I would have to close my eyes when we walked across the street and just hold on to my husband because it's so scary. I was in fear of my life because they don't obey traffic laws at all.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it was interesting, but I'm really glad we got to see his country and the culture, and that was a really neat experience. So after 3 weeks, actually, he was, we were holding him a lot. He was starting to hold his head up a little more, and we came back, and it was kind of the first part of December, and we took him to the doctor the next day, and he looked him over, and then, we said, he's not using his arm. So what is that? And he said, well, it can be two things. He could have some kind of injury, or it could be something with his brain. And so we got an order for a CT scan, and it was a few days later. And so I took him for the CT scan, and the doctor called us that night at home and just said, he said, it's not normal. And so, at that point, we didn't really know what that meant, but we knew it was it was a big deal. And so we said, okay, well, it was kind of a cry about it, and then let's figure out how to make this work. And so that's kind of what we did. We had a good cry, and then, okay, I'm going to figure out what I need to do next. And at that point, we started lots of therapy, and, he had wonderful therapists. They were coming in our house at that point because he was pretty young. And so we had lots of therapists in our house all the time. And it was definitely not what I expected as a mom, because I kind of, you have this idea in your head of what it's going to be like. And a therapist in my house every day that was not on the plan.
Right.
So that was definitely, something that it was hard, because I was thinking, I just want to be a mom and take him and go play and do these fun things. And you kind of have, I think anybody can have totally wrong expectations of what it's like to be a parent, obviously. But special needs, therapists, all that stuff was just definitely not in my plan. So a few months later, we were able to go to Children's Hospital and get an MRI. And that's when they found, that's when they told us he's got cerebral palsy. He has parts of his brain that are just totally missing. So he doesn't have like the speech part of his brain. And there's some other parts that are just not there. And so, they're telling us the brain is really an amazing organ and can make up for some of those deficiencies. So you just, you never know what will happen. So we just kept, moving forward with therapy. He wasn't talking. And I really had this idea that, well, I've got a really strong faith. So I'm praying and he's going to talk. And I would have therapists tell me like, he may not. And I'm like, well, I am praying about it. So I really think he is, and so then we had, my first biological daughter. He was almost 3 when we had her. And as she developed, it was like all of a sudden I had somebody to compare him to.
Yeah.
And it was really hard because it was a strange time, because in one way I was so happy to have my daughter and she was doing so great, but then I could see all the stuff he had not done or couldn't do. And it hit me, oh my gosh, she's going to talk before he does. And that was just really sad to me. But I still, I kept thinking, okay, he's going to talk. So we went through, several years. He's not talking. And I finally came to the point where I'm thinking, okay, it's probably not going to happen. And so when he was 4, we got a communication device, and he started learning some words on it. Sorry. And then as he was able to use that to communicate, I started understanding how much he was understanding me. Because for a long time I didn't know, does he even know what I'm saying? And he started using that to talk back to us in a way. And we moved at the time a little bit after he got it, and we had this speech therapist who was just really amazed at all he could do. Every time I met with a new speech therapist, they would say, it is really incredible that he can do these things on this device, because we don't have any kids that can do this. Wow. And we have a lot of kids who have these and they just kind of sit to the side, or maybe they can say a word or two, but he started making sentences. He can use ing endings and plurals and all this stuff. And so it occurred to me, it was several years later, he was probably 7 or 8, where it hit me like God said, he does talk. Like, I did answer your prayer. It's just not the way that you thought it was going to be. And
wow,
the fact that and the fact that he doesn't have a speech part of his brain, but he can understand everything. He can tell me anything on his device. And I have had doctors who say he shouldn't be able to do this. I don't know how he can do this. I expected a totally different child when I looked at his MRI, and he came in like he shouldn't be able to do this. So, so it really is. He is really amazing. He's very smart and just very visual. And so it's pretty incredible all he can do with it. So now he's 12 and he is doing well. He uses it to just tell us all kinds of things. We just got one of those Alexa things from Amazon, and he likes to tell Alexa to play certain songs. So he uses his communication device to talk to Alexa. It's kind of funny.
And you have to tell, so I know Camille personally, like in real life, and she has this really funny story about his communication device and the voices that he uses, right?
Oh, how he likes to change the voices?
Yeah, and his therapists don't like it because they want him to use the male voice that is realistic, right?
Oh, right. He likes Allison. That's his favorite, which is this woman. Or he'll change it to these voices, like you can change how fast and slow it goes. And so he can do it where he sounds like an alien. And he has this prayer on it. He wanted to pray at Thanksgiving. And so he has this prayer on it. And I was like, you're not praying in an alien voice at Thanksgiving, okay? You can say the prayer, but we have to switch back to the normal voice because it's kind of creepy. He likes to play with the voices, and I let him every once in a while, but I can lock it too. So I'm like, you're not playing with them today.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I love it because he's like a normal 12-year-old boy in that regard.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I totally interrupted your story. That just always cracks me up.
Yeah, that's funny. No, I think that's really about it. That's kind of where we are now. And he still has lots of therapy. We didn't find out he was autistic until he was probably 9 or 10. He had a lot of behavior issues and there were just lots of questions about it, but lots of sensory issues. And it took a long time to get that diagnosis and kind of figure out what was going on there. And so that, is kind of another curveball in the middle of it. But it helped me, at that point. I think with the first diagnosis, it was overwhelming because it's not what I expected at all. But by the time we got the autism diagnosis, it was kind of a relief to me because I was like, I just need to know what is going on so that I can figure out what I need to do about it. And right. So that came later, and it's, just kind of led us down another different path.
Yeah. And so, okay, so you've just finished with your adoption story. So like the Zachary focused part of the story, but meanwhile you had your second biological child, and tell us a little bit about how that affected you personally.
Well, like I said, it was kind of a strange time after she was born. I really think her first couple of years is kind of when I went through the grief of his special needs. And so I was in some ways just so happy to have my kids, but in other ways really sad because I knew things were different for him and they weren't the way that I wanted them to be. And so, when we first got his diagnosis and we first brought him home, you're kind of in denial for a while. Even though I know he's getting these diagnoses, I know that we're having lots of therapists, but all these therapists are going to help him. This is going to be fine. We're going to get through it. And he's going to be kind of normal, to use a bad word. That's kind of what I thought, like, it's all just going to work out. He's going to talk. It's going to be okay. And as I went through that time with her is kind of, I think, when it hit me like, oh, this is not going to be what I expect it to be. And so there was just a time of finally kind of accepting it and also being sad about it and really grieving over that part of my life, grieving over the fact that kids had disabilities. I had never really been around kids with disabilities very much. And so I would take him to therapy and see, you know, all these kids coming in wheelchairs and with things that are broken. And it just hit me like, oh my gosh, there's all these children that are suffering. And why should a child have to suffer? You know, it was just sad. And so that was just kind of working through that and a new realization for me because that had not ever been a part of my life.
Yeah. Well, and I hope you don't mind me disclosing this, but I mean, physically you were struggling a little bit too. And I'm sure that can't be, you know, you're getting all of this information about your son. You have now 3 kids and you were physically struggling as well.
Yeah. It wasn't until later, kind of after I had been through all that I didn't start having my own physical issues. And so it was after my second daughter was born that I had an injury in childbirth and just have, you know, kind of had to deal with some of my own disability. And that it gave me definitely a different perspective on him and just the things that he struggles with. It kind of gave me more of an understanding of his frustrations. And yet he has so many more than I have because he's very smart and he wants to say things, and not being able to say them for years was such a source of frustration. And so it's better now because he can use his device more, but there's still times where it's hard because he wants to get something out, and that is, it's difficult, you know, I mean, especially when he was younger and didn't really have that ability. You know, there was just lots of tantrums and yelling because he wants to tell you something and you are not getting it. And so, yeah, it just, you know, it definitely is, it's a struggle for him, but it's something we're working through. And really in the past year, I mean, I just always see progress with it.
Yeah. Well, and it's really cool. I mean, hearing you talk about how God has put these lessons or these realizations from him to you along the way. And I'm sure that they were just perfectly spaced out to where you know, I mean, I'm sure it's frustrating, but where you needed that realization or that, you know, I mean, with him telling you, he does talk, just not in the way that you thought he was going to, or even with your disability and just have, you know, giving you a better understanding of your son that you probably would have never asked for or knew would be coming beforehand.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I can tell you that if someone had said, do you want to adopt a child with special needs? Like, I wouldn't have chosen it then because I didn't think I was capable. I was like, that's for somebody else. That's not for me. And some people do, you know, have a heart for that and will go out and choose a child with special needs to adopt because God has called them to do that. And obviously God had called me to do that. I just didn't know it.
Right.
And so,
your calling was less subtle.
Right. Right. I knew God was calling me to adopt, and that is, you know, that's where he led me. And I feel like there were little things all along the way where he showed me, like, this is the child I have for you, even before we went over there. And it was really neat with his name. I chose his name, and then I thought, I just want to see what it means. And I looked it up, and it means remembered by God. And I was like, oh, wow. You know, I mean, God did remember him and made a life for him and has given him the help he needs. You know, he had to be forced to walk through therapists. A lot of the things he's been able to do physically, I don't think he would have done without therapy if he had been, laying in a bed all day. So I know God is taking care of him, and he will continue to.
Yeah. Oh, that's so awesome. So let's jump into I love your adoption story, and I actually have never heard the full story, so this is really cool. But as someone who my kid's special needs is way different than yours. His is not a physical thing. But I was so excited to have solidarity with someone who had that unmet expectations piece of their adoption story too, because you understand. I mean, that's so incredibly hard to just feel like you knew what your plan was going to be and what you were told even by the professionals in the adoption situation that everything would be a certain way, and then it wasn't. And so if it's okay with you, I'd love to get into a little bit of that. What was there a range of emotions that you felt, or was it truly just this understanding from God that like, this is going to be okay? Because it wasn't like that for me. There was definitely a period of anger. There was definitely a period of like, everything would be better or everything would be different if I had just known. And then I look back and I wonder, would I have said yes if I had known? And that's kind of what you're saying too.
Yeah. Oh, I think if I had known beforehand, if they had explained everything to me, to that 20-something-year-old girl, I guess I was 29, I can't remember, I probably would have said, no, thank you. But now, like if I could make the choice now for myself, I would go back and do it all again. I wouldn't change anything. And I think that, it's definitely stretched me. It's grown me. I've probably experienced every emotion with it, just fear, anger, being distraught, thinking, what in the world am I going to do? I mean, there's still so many problems that we come upon every day. There's always issues. And so it's always a challenge. But, I just feel like I know that God put him in our family, and he's my son. I don't think of him as adopted anymore. I don't think of him as Vietnamese. I don't even see him as Vietnamese. I kind of forget, like when we are places, I don't really think about people looking at us and going, oh, he's adopted. It's so obvious. Whereas I kind of did when I first adopted him and we would go out and he was a baby. I was like, oh, this is so obvious. People know right away he's adopted. And I just don't even think about it anymore because he's just my child. And it definitely, there's always room to grow. There's always different emotions that come with it. But I just feel like God's just been with us every step of the way. I feel like he's going to take care of Zachary no matter what happens. His name means remembered by God. I just have that knowing that God's going to take care of him. And sometimes I'm trying to figure it out too much. I'm trying to figure out, what do we do about this? How do we solve this problem? And sometimes I have to just let that go because I can't really solve all his problems. There's always going to be challenges, and it's just definitely a way of learning to trust God daily, which is, it's not always easy, and I don't always do a good job of it, but it's definitely a daily thing, and it has to be. It's a kind of a test of faith, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also cool, and this is changing subjects a little bit, but I think it's cool just thinking about his disability, that your kids, your other biological children, have never known anything different. And so, they don't have those unmet expectations, but which is a really cool spin on things, that there was no explanation on your part of like, this is, Zachary's different because of XYZ. Right. They've just always known that.
Yeah.
But that's a different path than you've walked because you've had to educate yourself on his conditions. You've had to, I mean, for however many years, I can't remember how many years is it between him and Rachel?
3.
Okay. So for 3 years, you were a brand new mom and your journey was so different than probably all of your friends' journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was 2 years. We had him and she was born 2 years later because he was almost a year when we adopted him. But it was really neat when they were young. Rachel just engaged him. It didn't matter to her that he couldn't talk or that, whatever, there were certain things he couldn't do. And, they're so sweet to him. They just help him and he's always wanting things and they'll get them for him or, he doesn't use his right arm. He's got hemiplegia. And so, they'll build things for him that are hard to do with just one hand. And, they've just kind of grown up with that. That's the way it is. And eventually they kind of asked some questions, but, they love him and accept him and it's just not really a big deal to them.
Yeah. That's so, that's just so, it's such an interesting take. You don't meet a lot of people that adopt before they have biological children. And so I always love hearing their experience.
Yeah.
And, this is getting into some harder stuff that I imagine a lot of people are afraid to ask you, but, this is a podcast and that's like my job. So,
fire away.
Yeah. So let's talk about love a little bit. So, I imagine that you, as a first-time mom, like I had no idea what loving a child meant at all, and my mom growing up would always tell me you can never understand until you have been a parent what it feels like to love your child. And I was like, okay, sure. And
whatever.
Then, yeah. And then I had my first child. I was like, oh my gosh, where has this like version of love been? I don't even understand what's happening to me. And
I remember thinking, oh my gosh, is this how much my mom loves me? I had no idea.
Yeah, exactly. And I just wanted to like hug her and be like, you love me so much.
Thank you.
Exactly. And we know that with our adopted kids, that love is going to look different. It just is. And I know for me, it was a little bit of a mourning process and a lot of a guilty process for me to understand that it was okay for it to look different. And I know that, it was a process for you and now you don't look at him as adopted or Vietnamese or different or whatever. And I feel that way about, especially my youngest adopted child too, but it was a process to get there. So how did that feel for you, especially with the unmet expectations? You looked at him and he was so different than you thought he was going to be. What was that love process for you?
Well, it definitely took time. I mean, it was definitely different than having a biological child. You also don't have all those hormones kind of coursing through your body. And so, it was, instant like, definitely. And I thought he was adorable and I wanted to take care of him. I mean, there was definitely this desire to take care of him. He needs to be taken care of. He needs me. But it also was a strange feeling, just like, okay, am I a mom now? We just went through this ceremony and suddenly I'm a mom. That was kind of different because it's not the typical way that people become a parent the first time.
Right.
And so I remember just looking at him. We were on a bus, from the ceremony to somewhere else. We just signed all the papers. And I remember just looking at him thinking, wow, I guess I'm a mom now. I don't really feel different, and it's like, this is kind of strange. But I would say it definitely took time for the feelings. I think that, there's different ways to look at love. And so I think in a way, I loved him in that I was willing to sacrifice to take care of him and I wanted to do what was best for him. And I felt like, okay, he's my child now and I've got to take care of him. I've got to do these things. But I would say it took probably months for really the sweet, loving feelings to be there. Just the emotional connections, and that took time. And then, it it's been a challenge of ups and downs at times because, he was not very affectionate. And it really wasn't until probably about, probably 4 or 5 years ago that he really kind of started hugging us a little bit. And his hugs are different than most people's. He would just kind of like lean his head into us. And so he wasn't real like physically, you didn't get a lot of physical affection from him. And, if you try to hold on to him and hug him, he didn't really like that. And so, that part was kind of difficult. But I definitely, it was a process. And it's really kind of neat too, just to see his process in it. Of course, we're all the parents that he's ever known. He doesn't really remember Vietnam, but, because he couldn't express things verbally and he didn't express a lot physically, it was really a long time until he was able to kind of start expressing his feelings towards us. And I feel like he's kind of had more emotional development. He's developmentally delayed also. So even though he is 12, he's not like a typical 12-year-old. He's more, kind of younger developmentally. And so it was just last year that we had come home from church one day and we were all in the kitchen, and my husband and I were both getting the kids' lunches together, and my girls were sitting at the table, and he was just kind of walking around the kitchen, and he went over to his communication device and he typed, "I love you." And he went over to each person in the room and gave us a hug.
Wow.
And it was the first time he had ever said, "I love you." It was amazing. And I was just like, oh my gosh.
You didn't cry at all, right?
No.
Not one tear.
It just melts your heart. It was so sweet. And so those kind of things have been really special because they took so long to come,
Yeah.
And they mean something because, he's not just kind of saying it, "Oh, like, yeah, I love you, Mom," but
right.
It's something he's thought out and done. And, just recently he started trying to kind of give me a kiss on the cheek, and he can't really pucker his lips. And he kind of drools. So it's kind of slobbery, but it's
a really special
sweet.
kiss.
Yeah, it's really sweet. So those things have been really special.
That's awesome. So did your feelings toward him change at all or grow at all when you had your biological children, or was it just the same?
That's a good question. I don't know. Let me think. It was...
I think it's awesome that you even have to think about it, because I think that for so many of us adoptive moms, it's like we have these thoughts and these feelings that then we immediately feel guilty for, and we try to reason with ourselves about why they're not true. And so it's a good sign that you're even having to remember and think about it.
Well, that's good, I guess.
Not that, hey, you know what? I'm going to apologize. I shouldn't have said good sign, because I'm having to learn for myself that there is no good or bad there, that I need to give myself some grace.
Yeah, that's right. I think I remember when he was younger, just maybe not having as much of an emotional connection with him as I did with my daughters. I remember talking to a friend about it because I think I did feel somewhat guilty about it. And I remember her saying, "Well, it's okay. I love my son differently than I love my daughters." And I was like, "You do?" Her kids were all biological,
Yeah.
I was like, "You do?" And so I kind of found that I feel like I love all my kids equally, but you kind of love them in different ways, in the way they need to be loved,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
so I think, there is a difference in probably our emotional connection, because he doesn't sit and talk to me for, long amounts of time or give me lots of hugs and snuggles, but I would say that I would do as much for him, work as hard for him, or, have as much I guess, strong feeling in myself towards him that I would towards any of my children.
Yeah. Well, and this is, it's a hard conversation, but I think it's such an important one in dealing with our kids, that we have unmet expectations, or, not even unmet, but just different expectations from the beginning to the end. And I think it's really cool to hear different moms talk about their different journeys that they have with their kids. And I'm even trying to like process how to explain it, because we all have these different experiences, and we have to learn to give grace to ourselves no matter what that journey looks like, because God's going to have a different plan for each of us. As we both know, it's going to look so different than we want it to or imagine that it will. So I'm really, I don't know, I'm glad that you are able to talk to us about such a like healthy view of your child through all these changes and ups and downs and curveballs that you've experienced.
Well, it's, I've definitely been through a lot of different emotions with him. And I think, some of that just comes with time, because it takes a while to work through a lot of that. And there are times when you feel kind of down in the dumps about it and you feel overwhelmed. And then there are times where, you have a better faith about it, like a stronger trust. I guess it just kind of, it's a journey, and it's definitely a daily thing, I think.
No, I think that like, that's like the quotable moment of this episode, what you just said. Yeah. It's awesome. Like, it's a daily thing. Absolutely. And, I think that if you were to say, which, we'll get to that part here in a minute, but like, if you were to give any advice to moms that are considering adoption or who are in the beginning of it, that's one of the things I would say is just like, it is a daily thing. It's not, and that for me, like, I'm such a system oriented person. Like, once I get something in place, I want it to work forever and ever and ever.
Right.
And as a mom, like, that 0% of the time happens. And
it's going to change in 5 days, right?
Right. It's like, it's so, I mean, we could go off on a tangent about how agitating that is, but anyway.
Yeah.
But that's such good advice, just that like, this is going to change. So buckle up and, get your praying hands together, basically.
Right. Yeah. You can't ever know the future. And that's with any of your kids, I mean, it's definitely, I think being a parent stretches your faith and shows you all the things about yourself that you didn't even know were wrong, how selfish you are and how much, I mean, like, okay, I thought I was a pretty good person before this, suddenly I'm like impatient and angry and like, what's wrong with me? So it definitely, I mean, it's kind of like God chipping away at those things in your heart that, you suddenly have to give up a lot of yourself for. And with a child with special needs, there is a demand that is different than a typical child. And you're going to have lots of doctor's appointments that I had not expected to be going to the doctor all the time and seeing specialists. You're going to have all these therapists and therapies and things that you hadn't planned for. And so it's definitely, I mean, I think we had talked about this once of me saying, I suddenly came to the realization one day where God just kind of said to me, like, this is not about you, because I was not liking the way things were going. Like, I don't want to do this. This is not my plan. This is not what I like. And I had read, it was like everywhere I went, I had read something, and then this verse came to my head, and, and then it was just suddenly like God was just saying, this is not about you. You have to kind of get past that. And that's not always easy.
Yeah. And I had forgotten about that conversation that we had, because when we talked, I loved when you said that, because I was like, oh my gosh, me too. Like, I was standing there feeling sorry for myself, and God was like, this is still my plan, even though there's nothing in it for you, or it doesn't feel like there is. Isn't that like, don't you love when God talks to you like that, where he's just like, so you kind of just need to get over it. I mean,
right. It's like, oh man.
You're like, thanks for that.
Okay.
I love it. Okay, well, so are you ready to jump into some of these closing questions?
Sure.
Cool. Okay, so what do you wish someone had told you at the beginning of this adoption journey? Like, just looked you in the eye and said, this is true.
Well, I don't think I would have believed them if they had told me. Anyway, like I said, our adoption counselor who did our home study, she tried to tell us. She said, international adoption is a risk. You can't trust the medical papers. You don't really know what you're going to get. And I just kind of blew her off. So I'm not really sure I could have even listened at that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good answer. I don't think I've ever gotten that answer before. Like, that's so honest. I love it.
I really don't think if anybody had said something to me, I would have even believed them.
Yeah.
I guess, I guess you can, for someone who is adopting, obviously just to know that it may not turn out the way you think it's going to, and that's okay. Even if it doesn't, God has a plan and that's okay.
Yeah. That's good. That's awesome. So, okay. What is something you wish you had done differently along this journey? And I asked this question, and I think a lot of people take it to mean something really deep, and it can be, but it can also be like one of mine was I wish that I had laid off on all the food stuff. I got a teenage boy and I was way over dramatic about how much he was eating and what he was eating, and was it was too much. I should have just chilled the heck out. So
yeah. Probably what I would have done differently is gotten a little more help at the beginning and tried to rest more, because when he came home, he was not sleeping at all. And I just thought, I can do this. I am going to, barrel through this. And he would wake up, and I think he just wanted to be held because he hadn't been held for so long. And so he would wake up in the middle of the night, and I would hold him for 30 minutes. I'd put him back in his bed, and 30 minutes later, he'd wake up. And we did this for several months, and I ended up getting mono. And I was really, really sick because I was not sleeping, and my immune system kind of went crazy. And at that point, then I had to sleep. And so I had, my mom had to come stay with us for a month while I recovered. And I just, I think I didn't really recognize my limits. And I think I would have probably gotten more help from my husband with that kind of thing. I just thought, I can do all this. And my body didn't really respond very well to that.
Yeah, your body was like, no, you can't.
Yeah, you have to sleep. But, you think, he needs me. But he would have been okay, with other people helping too. But I think I just wanted to do it all myself. And that is not always a good thing.
No, that's a good one. That's a good advice piece. Get help. We've all been there. So, okay. Yes. So what is your favorite way that your tribe supported you through your adoption story?
I think just our families just definitely took him with open arms, just this is our family, he's in our family now. And that was really sweet. I had friends who gave me baby showers and brought meals and all those kind of things. One thing that really meant a lot to me, which is kind of this really little bitty thing, but it has stuck with me for a long time. And that is, I saw a lady at a store that I knew, and I told her I was adopting, and she actually had some adopted children also, but she said, congratulations. And she gave me a big hug, and I was like, nobody has said congratulations to me. You say congratulations to a pregnant person, but you don't say people don't say congratulations to you when you're adopting, or at least they didn't to me. And so it just meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird. It's just this little thing, and she probably doesn't even remember it, but it stuck with me because she was celebrating it. It was this is something to celebrate,
That's so, thinking back, I don't think that anyone told me that either. I just had never thought about that. But
yeah,
they had a lot of other nice things to say, but congratulations isn't something you usually say. So that's a good one. I haven't heard that before. Okay, and my follow-up to this is what's a way that you were hurt or misunderstood by maybe not your tribe, but just people in general?
I remember people asking me, like, don't you want to have kids of your own? I got that several times, and that was hurtful because I'm like, he is my own. I didn't like that kind of terminology.
Right.
And I had some friends, I think that him having special needs was difficult for, and it kind of, ended our friendship in a way. We just didn't spend as much time together because in a way, I don't know, it was hard for them to handle or something.
Right.
And so that was kind of a shock to me, and that was hard.
Yeah. Oh, I imagine. Gosh, that would be, and especially because you were still reeling from this, and I imagine you wanted to tell those people, like, this isn't necessarily what I asked for either, but we're here, and it'd be great if you could stay by my side.
Yeah, and there were friends like that, and there were friends who did invite us over for play dates and things like that, but then there were some that just didn't. It was almost kind of just this drop off in our relationship, and that's hard.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Well, and I can tell you this is not, it's not really about adoption, but I did have a mom that came alongside me who had a child with special needs. And I didn't really even realize how much I needed her at the time, but he was really young, and we would meet for coffee, and, she would just be very honest and real with me. And I think she kind of helped me through that grieving process. It was during that same time where I was kind of going through all those emotions, and she just kind of talked to me about, dealing with special needs in the long term. It's not, it's a lifetime of things to deal with. And we have a community group now we're in of parents with special needs. It's just so nice to have other families that you can share those difficulties with who understand it and get it, because it's, it's different.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, we've had, you were talking about you didn't know how much you needed her at the time. We've had something come up with one of our kids medically where he has to have eye surgery, and that was completely off my radar. Like, I would have never guessed that would be a path we were walking. And I have a friend that she was my friend before, and I knew her daughter had trouble with her sight and vision issues, but I never really paid that much attention to it because that wasn't my journey. And she has been wonderful. Like, I didn't realize how much I had needed her, and now I talk to her like all the time. So
yeah, it's so nice just to have somebody who's been there and can relate with what you're going through.
Definitely. Okay, so if you had to just sum it all up into one piece of advice or encouragement for adoptive families, what would you say?
Do you mean families that have already adopted or who are thinking about adoption?
Both.
Okay. Well, I would say if you're thinking about adoption and it's in your heart for a reason. And so I would say just go for it, because I think God is the one who places those desires in our heart and that kind of nudging. I think after I adopted Zachary, I was like, why isn't everybody doing this? This is a wonderful thing to do, and I kind of realized years later, because I really thought everybody should be adopting.
Right.
But I thought years later, it kind of occurred to me like, oh, maybe this is, God places this on different people's hearts. And so if that desire's there, if you feel that, then, I would just encourage you to follow it and follow God in it. And for families who have already adopted, just kind of like what I said before, get support, get help with the things that are difficult. And if you can find people who understand and have been through it also, that's so helpful.
Absolutely. So, okay. Thank you so much, Camille. And, I don't like, you're on social media, right? I don't know if we're
kind of.
I was going to say, I don't like remember seeing you post anything or anything like that, but usually I always ask where, people can find cute pictures of your kids or whatever, but
yeah, I have a Facebook account, but I don't use it. So I'm kind of behind the times.
So listeners, you will have to rely on my show notes for this episode, in which I will force Camille to send me pictures of her family. Then you can put a face to the name.
That's right. I can do that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Camille. This was an awesome, awesome conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. I know this stuff is hard, and I hope you found encouragement here. Remember, you are enough, and you're doing a great job. God wants to be at the center of this journey, and He is big enough to redeem all of our mistakes. Don't forget to check out show notes and other resources at theadoptivemompodcast.com. Thanks again for listening.